Well, Matt, I've got some good news and I've also got some bad news. Good news is that I'm back. We're
Yeah.
back. The show is back. I was off for a few weeks. Had my daughter was born, so that was a big
Woo.
life change. That was fun. Last 2 weeks have been a lot of new and a lot of good. And I was sort of expecting to come back to like this tsunami of Apple news and everything was going to change and the spring event leaked and all that stuff. And well, good news, bad news is that we got some stuff that leaked, but still pretty quiet in the
Yep.
tech world, especially in the Apple world. And I guess that's sort of par for the course. It is very normal for this time of year to be very quiet after a bustling fall and holiday season. But we do have some new stuff to talk about in this episode regarding that spring event. We've learned a lot of surprises, some good news and bad news, which we'll get into. But first, we want to hear from you guys. We have a question we're going to tee up to in a minute. But if you have a question, a comment, some feedback, what you'd like to see at the next Apple event, drop us a text at the Apple Circle hotline number. That is 949-354-3508. Of course, you can tweet us. We're the Apple Circle on Twitter. You can go to the YouTube channel and drop us a comment. Just search the Apple Circle podcast on YouTube. We're there with the video versions and clips and all. And yeah, I think that sort of covers the housekeeping. Matt, how have you been? How has the last 2 weeks been for you off the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, for everyone listening, we weren't exactly sure what the whole situation was going to be, so we would have given you some heads up that there were not going to be episodes, but hey, we're through it now, so we're back with new episodes. But yeah, no, like you said, not much, but I mean, there's some good stuff to get to. I think first off, like you mentioned, let's just get right into this question because I think it's a good question and it's a question a lot of people often have. This is from Nick. It's a pretty long paragraph, so I'll summarize, but you guys can pause on the screen if you're watching the video version, which by the way, you should definitely do over on the YouTube channel. But the basic gist here, should I get an iPad Air with a keyboard or should I get a MacBook Air with the more traditional laptop? He wants pencil support, but he's afraid that the iPad's not quite the laptop experience that he might be looking for, and he's also going to be using it for basic internet stuff later on for college. I think that's what he said. Yeah, for college. So which one should you go with? And for me, maybe you think differently in this, but if you're really trying to decide between either or, unless you have a particular reason why you need, like, let's say the Apple Pencil, like maybe you're going to college and you're doing art classes and it would be helpful to be able to digitally use, the Apple Pencil on the iPad. Unless you have a specific case, if you're going back and forth, I'd say just default to the laptop because it's going to work. Laptops have been around forever, so exactly what you're getting into. There's no questions about it. Yeah, having the Apple Pencil in those certain situations is nice, but unless you absolutely need it and you're just not sure, laptop's probably the way to go. Although you did say MacBook Air, and I don't know what your time frame is, but maybe not buying the MacBook Air. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. But what do you think?
It's the age-old question, right? MacBook Air, iPad, what's a computer? The iPad can replace my computer. And I think you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I'd recommend. The iPad is a great device. And for some people, it can be a total computer replacement. You can totally do everything you need to do on it. You have the Apple Pencil. It's great. It's a wonderful device to have. But I feel like for most people, especially college-aged people, it's a great complement to a computer, but it's probably not a full replacement to your computer, especially if you're going to be going into college. Many schools, high schools, even higher education institutions have special software, special services. There are like a number of, at least when I was in college, those textbook websites that were sort of the extension. You do quizzes on and stuff like that required different web plugins that you didn't have on mobile Safari. That's even more the case today as a lot of people are going virtual. There's a lot of different applications that require
Blackboard.
a computer and not iPad. Yeah, we did use Blackboard, unfortunately.
I hate that.
And yes, there are definitely workarounds to the iPad, and there are ways to sort of make it work. But if you don't want to be frustrated with all that goes into that, and you just want a really good experience, I would probably just go MacBook Air. You're not going to have the Apple Pencil support, granted. That's not a stylus support on the MacBook Air, but it's going to do everything else, I think, a little bit better. And I think, as we talked about this before to someone else who had a similar question, with that MacBook Air, you're getting an enormous amount of headroom with the M2 chip inside. With the new ones, I mean, you can do everything from writing essays and watching YouTube videos to like editing 4K video and doing some, light to intensive gaming and photo work and stuff like that, a lot of room to grow. And if you're unsure what the next 4, 5, 6 years of your life are going to be like, then it might be nice to have a little flexibility with your computer. So I'd probably go MacBook Air unless you are dead set on the iPad, or best of both worlds, if you can swing it, go with the MacBook Air, then save some money, and then maybe buy a used iPad Air, especially if a new iPad Air comes out. Might be a good time to buy an iPad Air at Apple Refurb, or if you can buy it used on eBay. Might not be a bad way to go. Hopefully that answers your question, Nick.
Yeah. No, I was actually going to say, though, kind of going on to that refurb thing, you could probably get the best of both worlds if you do go the used/refurbished market. Like, say you really want that Apple Pencil experience. I mean, you could get the base iPad, which now supports the Apple Pencil, and a refurbished or used MacBook Air for probably a very similar price. Like, you could probably get both if you wanted both experiences. I mean, that's definitely a way to go.
A lot of deals are there to be had on Apple products. You just sort of have to know where to look. And I think we did a whole episode on this a couple weeks ago. So go back on the YouTube channel or go in your podcast player and look for, I think it might have been the holiday episode. Matt and I broke down a bunch of ways to save on Apple products and refurb tips and stuff like that. So definitely check that out. But hopefully, Nick, that answers your question. And I guess, Matt, let's talk spring events. So since we last spoke, there have been some changes. Our new favorite leaker here, Dylan DKT, sort of dropped a bunch of leak bombs over the weekend and some surprises. So the obvious is sort of still obvious. iPhone SE 3 is coming. New iPad Air is coming. New Apple Silicon. Well, I guess new Macs are coming. But some surprises is that it looks like the M2 and the sort of M2 computers like the MacBook Air, they're getting moved to the fall. And also the iPad Pro with the M2 chip is also getting moved to the fall. Sort of before we dive into the details, do you have sort of initial thoughts on this? Does this make sense? Do you think Apple is sort of trying to spread out their releases for the year? Or why do you think there's sort of this move to do a new processor in the fall instead of the spring?
Yeah, this was interesting to see because, I mean, all the products, nothing really new here. Like these are all things we were expecting, but I think the most definitive rumor we were kind of relying on for the last little bit was that the MacBook Air was going to be coming at this spring event. I mean, there's two ways to look at this. Either the product's not ready or they're just, trying to spread it out a little bit. But, I mean, we've talked about the 2022 pipeline for a few times now in these episodes, and there seems to be a lot. So it kind of almost like they're pushing it farther and farther back. So it seems like the last part of 2022 or middle to last part is going to be very packed because the things that we're expecting to see, I mean, they're very cool updates, but like the more they push back, it seems like it's going to be a little packed as we go on. But yeah, I mean, my guess would probably be it's just not quite ready. That's the simplest thing. Like they need a few more months, whether that be for software, whether that be for maybe the last minute hardware or even production, ramping up or anything like that. I mean, the other thing you could think is that with all the supply chain issues and all the chip shortages, which are very much still real and still happening. We were talking right before this episode that my MacBook Pro is not going to get here until the end of February, possibly March, and we ordered it about 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, these chip shortages are real. So, I mean, you can also see a scenario where Apple is just going to start production on these MacBook Airs and just stockpile them so that when it is announced, they don't have those issues, because I know people are complaining about the MacBook Air. So, the MacBook Pro, the fact that you can't just go buy one. I don't know. There's a lot of reasons behind it, but not super surprising, actually. Once you really dive into it, it kind of makes sense.
I guess two other theories here that I have just sort of popped in my head. One is that obviously, as we get into these rumors, there is a case to be made that Apple wants to sort of squeeze a little bit more life out of the current M1 lineup. And with some new Macs, they might be able to do that and not sort of have those be sort of in the shadow of the M2, even though that probably wouldn't happen. But anyways, also, maybe Apple doesn't want to get caught setting a precedent for when they release new chips.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe there's a case to be made that if they release it at this event, then everybody's going to expect a new chip every year, which Apple could do, but maybe they don't want to. Maybe they want to do it every 18 months.
Yeah, didn't we see a rumor that it was like every 18 months was the projected timeline for these new chips?
I think so. I mean, we know that by the end of 2022, the Apple Silicon transition will be complete. So all Macs will have at least an Apple Silicon model. But then, sort of beyond that, we don't know, since all this is still so new, sort of when these chips get updated. Are we going to see a new M chip every year, then sort of the Pro and Max variants every year or every other year? I mean, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. But as of right now, if you're sort of waiting for the M2, it looks like that's going to be delayed until the fall, which I guess sort of this is still a little early, but maybe we're setting ourselves up for another like multi-event fall, because we've got an iPhone, Apple Watch event. We would now have an M2 MacBook Air, iPad Pro event. Seems like we've got at least 2 events happening in the fall, right?
Yeah, I mean, the more products we see, the more I'm thinking like each news cycle, or maybe what's the way to say this, like each quarter or whatever, wherever we expect an Apple event, like we might actually get 2 Apple events in those times. So like I know in the past we've had like a March and an April event, and then like a October, September, and a November event. I think we've had 3 at least one time in the past. So like there's a lot of stuff to announce. So I think that's very possible. One other thing I was thinking about the MacBook Air though is, you know, now that I'm kind of thinking about it a little bit more, there must be actually something very major that they have to finish or fix with this MacBook Air in order to push it up into the fall, because you would think for the MacBook Air that they would want that available for the back to school rush. I mean, what better way to sell a bunch of laptops than not only do you need a laptop because you're going to school, but it's also the brand new one with all the colors and all the cool new features. It's very thin, so you could take it to class with you, all that stuff. Perfect time for the back, what do they call it? Back to Mac? No. Is there a name for that?
Well, you know what? That's another piece of news I want to talk about. Speaking of that, let me derail for a second. As speaking of back to school, I've totally forgot to put this in the notes. If for those of you who haven't heard, Apple just closed one of their biggest loopholes of all time with their education store. Did you hear about this, Matt? With the
No.
Okay, so let me just say this: whether you were a student, a teacher, okay. Officially, if you're in education, so you're a teacher, you're a student, or you are in a classroom environment, you can buy Apple products at a slight discount by going through their education store. So this works. You could just literally Google Apple Education Store. You would say what institution you were from, or at least that's how it used to be. And then you could purchase most Apple products, maybe not all, like I know iPhones and stuff weren't discounted, but like Macs and stuff for maybe like $100, $152 less. It wasn't a huge discount, but it was worth it. It was there. Yeah. It was definitely worth it. Better than nothing. And you could do it in store as well. You could show, I remember back in the day, like your school badge or school ID, and you'd get the education pricing applied. And for one reason or another, I'm not here to condone this or condemn it, people were just doing it just because they could. Apple wasn't verifying this info. Yeah. You could just go to the website and place it. You didn't have to have an edu email address. You could just go and order it and get a little bit of a discount. Recently, I think just last week, Apple has now partnered with one of those education verification systems to now stop that loophole. So now, not only do you have to verify that you are attending or working at the educational institution you say you are, but they've also capped the number of products you can buy in a calendar year, I think. I don't know what the details are, but they have put some new restrictions on that. So if you are going through the process fairly, this shouldn't really affect you. But if you were taking advantage of the education discount unfairly, then that loophole has now been closed. And those systems are usually pretty good. I know Spotify and a number of these, I think YouTube Premium does it too. A lot of these subscription-based services use these. I think it's called Unidays. There's a couple other ones that sort of verify that you are in the school that you say you are. And they're pretty tough. They're not really easily beaten. So sorry to get off on a tangent, but you just reminded me with that back to school promo that they closed that loophole. So
yeah.
Something else to keep in mind if you're thinking of waiting for that MacBook Air is that you probably won't.
Well, if you're going to school,
promo.
If you're going to school though, you're fine. You still get you got your edu email or whatever, and you should be fine. I was thinking, interestingly, I have. I probably shouldn't say this because maybe someone at Adobe will be listening to this, but Adobe Creative Cloud, when I went to school, it was like $20 for the entire thing. And so I did that, and they're still charging me the same amount, even though like I'm not in school anymore. I'm just never going to change it. I'm always going to pay $20.
One of the perks, right? You get that edu email address. I know through my college, I still have I have the Word suite, so I guess I'll get like Word and stuff. And then I don't think I get Adobe, but there's like other like those other fringe benefits. It's like I hope they don't cancel this.
Yeah.
And then they started cracking down, and we used to have like story blocks and like a bunch of subscriptions
No, a lot
to
of
like
good
stock
stuff,
music
yeah.
and videos. But now they do it IP locked, so you have to be on the campus in order to access and download, which is kind of stupid.
What if
Anyways,
you just apply to a school but you don't actually sign up for classes? So you're still, you're still part of the school, but you don't.
I think that how it used to work, at least back when I was applying for those student discounts, is like you'd have to send like a picture of your schedule or some kind of weird system. I mean,
I didn't
I'm
have to
sure
do that.
there's ways to fool this. I don't know what it is these days, but they used to be like they do some kind of check to.
Well, mine
verify.
was like my school has a portal, and then you just go through the portal. So that's why I think it's still working for me, because I signed up through the portal, which I don't think was anything special. It just like was a special link. So I don't know. Well, that's enough about school and fancy links. Yeah, it's kind of a bummer though that they're. I mean, it makes sense. Like you can't get too mad because the whole point is it's for educators. So like if you're in education, then it shouldn't affect you at all. But you know, it was nice. It's always nice when there's a loophole. But okay, MacBook Air aside, yeah, we're probably gonna see that in the fall. That'll be interesting. I mean, we haven't really heard anything new about the MacBook Air. Like, it seems like it's all the same stuff. It's just pushed later on in the year. The other thing, though, that is getting pushed that we were somewhat expecting in the spring is the iPad Pro. And the rumors on that have been going back and forth a ton as well. So last time we talked about it, we were talking about how it's going to have wireless charging and a glass back. Well, apparently that is having some issues as well. Apparently, like, I guess it was a little too fragile, maybe a little too heavy. So Apple is instead at least investigating the possibility that they could use MagSafe with the iPad Pro, and instead of having a glass back, just make the Apple logo huge and then big enough to accept the MagSafe wireless puck and use that instead. The more I think about this, the more I think, first, that's not going to happen, and second, that sounds horrible. What about you?
Yeah, according to Mark Gurman over at Bloomberg, there have been a lot of issues with this iPad Pro for whatever reason. And it's still so unclear what iPad Pro redesign means. Like, there's that term that keeps throwing around, iPad Pro redesign. A redesign is coming. We still don't know what that means. But what we have heard, again, from Dylan DKT, who has a pretty accurate track record, is that the 11-inch iPad Pro will get mini LED this year. So that is something to look forward to. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and, you know, what do you think? If it was... Well, on one hand, obviously you're still going to be able to charge this iPad with USB-C. So the way that we've been doing it for all of us that have the iPad Pro, it's not going to change. If they do add wireless charging, is that something that you really care about? Especially if it's like only MagSafe. Is that something, I mean...
For me, no, I don't have a problem just plugging it in. I don't know what the rush and the need to have wireless charging on the iPad Pro is. I mean, it's such a big device, especially the 12.9 inch, especially even the 11 inch. It's so big that I don't know who's asking for wireless charging on the iPad Pro, unless this is sort of the theory that Apple's going to start with the iPad Pro and test this out and then remove the port. And like this would be the first portless device that Apple could release.
Which
it
is
doesn't make a
possible.
whole lot of sense to me, I guess. And then, you know, you got the M2 processor inside, mini LED. That's nice to see. But what else can Apple do, and what else are they really going to do? I mean, it's still it's a good device as it is. Maybe better battery life, I think, was one of the other rumors. But
That makes sense, yeah.
What else? What else are they going to do?
Well, there's no rumors about this, but what I would love for them to do, instead of making me use MagSafe from the iPhone, just give me MagSafe from the MacBook Pro, plenty thin. That there's no way that wouldn't fit on the edge of the iPad Pro. I think it would fit. And then that way it's basically it's the same idea, right? You're still charging, but you know, you get that more laptop-like experience, which clearly Apple's trying to push with the iPad. So I would rather see that. Like, that's something that's so confusing with the iPad. The more I think about it, it's like one month Apple is clearly pushing this as a quote unquote Mac replacement, and then the next month they're like, well, it's basically just a bigger iPad or iPhone. Like, they can't seem to settle on a direction. Like, if it's gonna be a laptop replacement, then let's just go all in. Let's give us all the desktop like things. Like, maybe there should be 2 USB-C ports, or maybe you should add MagSafe from the MacBook Pro on there. But then on the other hand, they're like, well, it's just going to run iOS and it's not going to have any of the cool features that we want. So it's like, I just wish, we say this every single time we talk about the iPad, but I want them to choose a direction and really go for it instead of just teasing us every time.
I mean, with the M2 processor inside, with that USB-C port that's Thunderbolt now, the great display, there's no limiting factor here in terms of hardware. It's just a software limitation. It's just Apple, for whatever reason, not allowing you to run Final Cut or Logic or full-fledged Mac apps on the iPad Pro. And it's funny because, to your point, Matt, there was this whole era for like a couple of years that it was, what's a computer? iPad Pro. iPad's your replacement to the computer. And maybe that was because it could be argued the Mac line was sort of stagnating and they weren't giving it a whole lot of attention and people were sort of criticizing it. And that was sort of Apple's focus, was iPad. But now with sort of the resurgence of the Mac and all this time being put into it, are they worried they're going to cannibalize Mac sales by people buying iPads instead of Macs? I don't think that's the case. Again, these are so complementary devices that it'd be nice to sort of do different things on different devices. But it is confusing when you sort of tout it one day that it's a computer replacement, then it's not. Then you put the M2 processor in there that's super powerful, but you don't really have apps to utilize it. It's just confusing. So I don't know sort of what this new era of the iPad Pro is. I mean, that redesign in 2018 definitely set a standard that Apple cares about the iPad Pro. They see this as a pro device. This is sort of their flagship tablet moving forward. And it's sort of now in 2021, or I guess now 2022, sort of 4 years later, wow. Where do we go? What is the next chapter in the iPad Pro story? Even the iPad in general, what is the next chapter in that story? And it just seems unclear as of right now. Hopefully Apple has a plan, because it doesn't seem like they have a clear plan, at least to us on the outside.
Yeah, and I keep thinking, like, I keep racking my brain, besides the wireless charging, what else are they going to do on the hardware side? And I don't know. And honestly, I don't care. I love the hardware. The hardware's perfectly fine with me. It's the software experience. So it's like, let's just not worry about the hardware for now. You're already updating the chip. That's fine. That's great. But let's work on that software. Again, we say this every time, but I think this WWDC, maybe we'll get a hint at what they are doing, but who knows?
So speaking of iPad, so the iPad Pro now is in the fall. So if you're sort of waiting to get that, you're going to have to wait a little longer. The iPad that we should see at the spring event is the iPad Air. Now, no design changes are really expected. That's still a really nice design.
Yeah,
but what we
good.
know right now is A15 Bionic probably going in there, so a new chip. And then also center stage technology for the camera, sort of follows you around to sort of be in line with the iPad Pro and iPad Mini. iPad Air's great.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to see? Is that sort of it?
I still have this gut feeling that they might put ProMotion in it, and there's no reason to have that leaked because it doesn't, like, I don't know. I just have a feeling that's going to happen. But other than that, I mean, those are good updates. Center stage, I think, is a must, especially when all the other iPads have it and the iPad Air doesn't. The only other thing I was thinking was, like, do you think they would go back to the A15X model with these lower end iPads? Like, give them a little bit more juice, but we're not quite going to the M2 chip. Do you think that's possible?
Maybe. I don't think so, though. I feel like Apple is like in that mode where they're mass producing so many A15s.
Yeah,
like, let's just
probably.
keep making them and just shove it in the iPad Air and just be done with it. I know the whole chip naming scheme is so weird because, and I think it was on another podcast. I don't know. Maybe it was the Genius Bar podcast with John Prosser and Sam Cole, where they were talking about, like, the naming scheme and, like, how it would have made more sense for it to be M1X, but now you have M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max, and there could have been an X and a Z, and that would have been better. And the whole chip thing is very confusing. I feel like what most people need to know is, as long as you have, like, a relatively modern iPad, you're going to be just fine. And again, especially considering that you're not running really pro apps on there besides the ones in the iOS and iPadOS App Store, there's not a whole lot of reason to need it. Like, you don't really need an M1 in the iPad Air. And I don't even know if there's a difference between the A15 and the A15Z. I feel like for the average person, especially the iPad Air customer, A15 just is going to be fine.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Why M2 in the iPad Pro? Just because they can? I don't know.
Exactly. Well, iPads, it's one of those, for me, it's a love-hate relationship. I love the iPad because of the hardware and stuff, but, like, at the same time, I just want it to do more. But I don't know. Hopefully this is the year that happens, but I'm not holding my breath. All right. Other things that we are expecting at this spring event. So now we get to the juicy stuff. Well, actually, you know what? Let's get the really boring thing out of the way real quick. iPhone SE 3. It's going to look the same. It's going to have 5G, and it's going to have the A15. That's about it. I would be surprised.
Are they going to call it the SE 5G?
Oh, they better.
Did you see that rumor?
Yeah, I mean they might because there were some other rumors that I think maybe I'm remembering this correctly, but that one of the big pushes for this is that it's like the cheapest 5G phone or whatever from Apple ever or something like that. So maybe they'll push 5G really hard, but I mean, who really cares? What I am worried about though is battery life, because the battery life on the SE now is not good at all. So adding 5G on top of that seems like a recipe for disaster, but yeah, whatever. The only other change I could see possibly there is maybe some different colors. That's the only other option. Like, other than that, it's the iPhone SE. If you want the redesigned, the new update of the iPhone SE, you're probably gonna have to wait until next year. All right, that out of the way. Now we get to the Macs, and that's where things are getting juicy. So the Mac Mini, more confirmation that we're getting a Mac Mini with an M1 Pro or M1 Max as an option. That was kind of the question, because on one hand, we're getting a redesign with, aluminum and this kind of like plexiglass or like plexi plastic on top to kind of give it a two-tone design. So that's great. And then also with colors, but the colors kind of make you think that maybe this is a home computer. But then we're also getting the rumors that it's going to have these, more pro level chips inside. Latest rumor is that it's going to have those pro chips inside, which I think for you, Robert, is definitely one of your most anticipated products, right?
I want it. I want it so badly. I got to say, it just sounds so nice. And that was, we had talked about this before, and that was the big question is it going to be M2 or is it going to be M1 Pro, M1 Max, or both? And as of right now, it looks like because of this delay in M2, this is just going to be M1 Pro and M1 Max. So again, Dylan DKT says a redesign is coming. I think the only person to really give us the details on the redesign is John Prosser. He showed off what he believes the redesign will look like. And it looks nice. Like Matt said, two-tone design. You've got a nice mix of USB-C, USB-A ports on the back, full-size HDMI port, sort of the MagSafe style power connector from the iMac is coming to the Mac Mini, and then your choice of M1 Pro or M1 Max inside. And if Apple sort of sticks sort of with the status quo, I got to look at pricing, but you probably will get a very good computer that's super powerful for not a bargain, but a relatively not unobscene amount of money. For maybe $1,200, $1,300, $1,400, you're going to get a really good computer that can do video editing and photo editing. And if you want the power of the MacBook Pro, but you already have a keyboard, display, and mouse, this new Mac Mini looks like it's going to be perfect. And it's also, you know what? It's nice that Apple is keeping the Mac Mini around, because there was definitely a period there a few years ago that it looked like it was going to just be killed off and it was obsolete and there wasn't a whole lot of love to it. I think it went a long time without an update, but now it seems like Apple still loves the Mac Mini, and it should be getting even better coming up in just about a month or two. So I can't wait.
No, yeah, I'm definitely excited for that. Have we seen any rumors on pricing? I'm going to look up right now.
I saw some speculation on Twitter from a couple people, maybe $12.99, $13.99, and I need to look at what the current pricing is.
So yeah, that's what I'm looking up right now. The current price is, as it loads, come on my fiber gigabit internet, $699 for a base model Mac Mini.
Man,
so here's my guess. My guess is that they're going to have the colorful option, and that's going to be the same thing with the M2 chip. Well, actually, I'm going back because kind of going back to what you were saying about the update cycle of the chips. Maybe they don't want to introduce an M2 right now in the spring. So that aside, let's just put that aside for a second. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a base model home Mac Mini with all the color options, all that kind of stuff, but it has a regular M level chip without the Pro or Max. And then they also have, maybe they don't call it anything different, but maybe it's just a SKU that is also very Pro oriented with the Max or the Pro chip. That's kind of my guess, because going from $699 to $1299, let's say, in terms of like base options, that's a big jump, and I don't know if Apple would do that.
I mean, it would be nice to see a $999 M1 Pro Mac Mini. I feel like that's the sweet spot. It's a little bit more, but you're getting a good processor inside. It's hard too, because Apple typically, they give you more and keep the price the same. They typically never or rarely do they decrease the price. So I'd have to imagine that they're going to keep something around the same $699 mark, maybe $799, but a base jump to like double, like, $12.99, $13.99, that's a hard pill to swallow. So like you said, I'd have to imagine there's something in between. Maybe it's an M1 and then M1 Pro and then M1 Max. And then I wouldn't be surprised if in the fall, when there's the M2 MacBook Air and iPad Pro, that there's also now an M2 option for the Mac Mini. Maybe it's just sort of going to come out in stages, but it seems like at least the Pro models or the Pro SKUs are going to be coming sooner than later.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised to see that at all. But this is definitely a computer that's on my list. The other computer that's on my list is what we're expecting in the spring as well, which I'm happy about because that's coming up very soon. The 27-inch iMac. Ooh, we're getting rumors. It's kind of going back and forth. Is it a 27-inch iMac, in addition to the 24-inch that we already have, or is it going to be an iMac Pro? I'm still convinced it's going to be, I don't know what to call it exactly, but the idea here is that it's an iMac Pro. That's kind of my guess. So we're still expecting a mini LED display, I believe, right? Or is that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so still mini LED, 27 inches. So that means, in many ways, it's very similar to the Pro Display XDR that we have now. So that is very exciting news. Also, we're expecting the M1 Pro and M1 Max. Here's a question though, for the processors, are we going to get a speed bump or performance bump because it is no longer, it doesn't have to, the efficiency isn't as much of an issue since it's not running on battery? I think we will. I think it's going to be the same chip, but it's going to just be at a higher clock speed.
Yeah, what we heard from, again, our good friend Dylan DKT, who we don't know, but we love to admire, he says that there is a 12-core version of the M1 Max specifically for this iMac Pro. So because there's more room in there and you're not limited by battery life and there's hopefully better thermals, you'd be able to sort of push those chips a little bit more. And it looks like there'll be an even more max version of the M1 Max. And considering what the M1 Max chip in the MacBook Pro can do, I can't even imagine a more top-spec, top-tier version of the iMac Pro. This thing is going to be an absolute beast. It's going to have, it checks all the boxes. Mini LED, ProMotion, 27-inch display, lots of ports on the back, maybe a space gray color, improved webcam. You've got the new chips. The only thing it's really missing is Face ID. Besides that, that would make it perfect. Everything else just sounds really good.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited for this. On one hand, though, it's like, the Mac Mini probably actually makes more sense for me because, like you said, like at least for your setup and my setup, we already have everything here. I got a monitor, which you can't see, but that's what I'm pointing at. I've got a monitor, I've got my dock, I've got my keyboard, my mouse, everything. So I could literally just plug in the Mac Mini and keep working. But at the same time, the idea of having that screen, the thin design, the just more aesthetic design, like it's just going to look better than my setup now. That's enticing. And then add on top of that, the most likely better performance. This is going to be a winning combo, I think, for a lot of people. There was some question of whether or not they would release the iMac and the Mac Mini at the same time, because whether or not that would cannibalize sales of one or the other. I don't know. Like, even though inside the processor might be very similar, I still feel like they're not the same market at all.
Yeah,
what do you think?
I agree. I agree completely. I think that there are two customers here. One who, I feel like the Mac Mini is a very special customer. If you're buying a Mac Mini, usually you have a utility for it. A lot of people just buy them just because they need like these like Mac drones that just sort of run programs and can do computational stuff, and they already have sort of the display and stuff. And usually, like us, if you're buying a Mac Mini, you're sort of buying that to slot into an already existing ecosystem. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Mac Mini customers, especially in businesses, buy like 10 or 20 of them because they're just looking to sort of buy a fleet. Where the iMac Pro is more of an enthusiast computer. It's more for someone who probably buys a new computer every couple of years. They're looking to make this their main machine. I feel like they are great options, but I don't see how they compete with one another because they're two sort of different things. A very special person buys a Mac Mini over an iMac Pro, and I'd even venture to guess that most people, at least most of our peers sort of in the YouTube tech space and creator space, they'd rather buy iMac Pro over Mac Mini, where Mac Mini is a little bit more specialized and it's a more of a special customer than those buying iMac Pros.
Yeah, no, I agree. Here's another question with the iMac Pro, though. What do we think pricing is going to be? Because I just looked up. I'm at the refurb store, and because they don't sell the iMac Pro anymore, the old version, but they do on the refurb store. And we're going from $4,500, well, 4,000, let's say, all the way up to 12,000 in the refurb store. So this is not brand new products. These are refurbished iMacs. What price range are we looking at for a mini LED display, a 12-core M1 Max, and this new design? It's going to be painful, I think. Do you think it will exceed the price of a Pro Display XDR?
In a configuration, probably. It's hard because what was the starting price tag of the iMac Pro when it launched? Wasn't it like $4,000?
I think it's $4,000.
$39.99, something like that. And it's hard. It's funny too because I just went to the Apple page and I accidentally clicked on the larger iMac, and it's an abomination that they're still selling this thing, the old 27-inch iMac. If you walk into an Apple store as of late and you see sort of their lineup, that iMac is still in the store. There's like one of them in the corner, and it looks horrible.
I know.
Compared to the other ones.
It's an eyesore.
So the pre-configs on Apple's website, let's see. So 1,700 for like the base. I wouldn't be surprised if we're at. Maybe Apple does a iMac Pro base config for what, $29.99, maybe $3,000.
I just looked it up. The iMac Pro 2017, which is when it was announced, initial price $4,999.
Wow,
so $5,000 for the iMac Pro, which had an Intel Xeon W. It had a 3.2 gigahertz clock speed for the base. It had let's see what else they had. 8 cores for the base. And then I'm trying to find whatever. We don't need to go into all the details, but $5,000. And you know what? Honestly, I'm afraid that it might not be that different. I can see $3,000 for the base, which does not have the M1. That's like the M1 Pro base model, like the 8-core model that they sell. And then if you want to get that 12-core, you're going to be paying some money for that. I wonder if it'll go higher than the old Mac Pro, though, because that went up to like $15,000. Well, that's the question for me.
If you think about it, the MacBook Pro these days now has a lot of the same tech, mini LED, ProMotion. Granted, the display is not nearly as big, but the pricing didn't change all that much.
Right.
I can't imagine that the iMac's going to be at let's say $2,000, but could we see a $29.99 base model, maybe a $34.99 base model? Could we be under $4,000 for a starting config? I feel like if that is the case, that's a win because the M1 Pro, it's not M1 Max level, but it's still a plenty capable processor for a lot of people, and it could be a good choice. But like you said, I don't know what that price is going to be. I mean, I can't believe it was $5,000. That's a hard bargain for Apple to charge.
That's a lot. And I'm looking at the price of the 27-inch iMac right now, and that's starting at $1,799. So I think they're going to have to go to that 2,000 range for the base model of the 27-inch.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that's a very kind of the same thing as the Mac Mini. Like, that's too big of a jump for the base price. Like, obviously, we expect, with inflation, chip shortages, all that kind of stuff, we expect a little bit of a higher price, plus just new technology, so it makes sense. But going up to, $3,000-$4,000 for the base model doesn't make a lot of sense. But I have a feeling that this is going to be the 27-inch iMac with a Pro variant, almost the same as what I'm expecting with the Mac Mini. I think that makes more sense, is that you can have, because Apple's in charge of all the silicon, they can say, well, we have the 27-inch version with the lower end processor, but we can go as far as we want with the same basic design. I think that's exactly what we're going to see. Maybe if you want space gray, it has to go like to the Max variant or something. I don't know, something like that, just to differentiate it a little bit more.
Isn't that funny? Back in the day with the plastic MacBooks, if you wanted the black MacBook, you had to buy the higher end Intel processor.
Duo.
You couldn't, you couldn't get the regular Intel processor. That was only the white model. It was just Apple loves to do funny things with colors. But yeah, I would expect something in that range. I feel like $3,000 makes sense for the M1
I say
Pro.
2,500. That's my guess.
I'd say 2,500. I think 2,500 would be a win. But does Apple usually do base models in $24 or $499 sort of mid-tier variants, or do they always do it at the sort of the end, like a $19.99?
Well, then $19.99.
I don't know.
Let's push for $19.99.
Now we're dreaming. $19.99. Just buy it as a display, and
I know,
somehow figure out how to rip the computer out of there. You'll be fine.
Yeah, that's the thing that's scaring me, is this mini LED display, because there's no way that's cheap. Like it's a little worrying that is going to be. Well, I don't know. Maybe there is. Maybe maybe all the rumors are focused on this Pro variant, but there is going to be a lesser version of it for the base model. I don't know. That's possible. And nobody cares because it's like the same display that they have now.
And I would expect to, I mean, what do you think, right or wrong? Probably like mostly the same configs as the MacBook Pro. Like you can do the different core counts and the different RAM and stuff like that. But then,
I could
of
see
course,
more
for iMac
RAM
Pro,
and higher end processor as an option at the high end. Yeah.
Yep.
So
well,
I'm excited
for it.
Happens. Yeah, I'm excited for it. I mean, I guess kind of we've talked about this too, but like this is gonna, I don't know. I'm probably gonna not buy. Well, I've been rambling. let me calm down for a second. There's so many good products. I'm like all over the place here. So on one hand, I want this iMac Pro, but the reason is because of the display. The rest of the stuff, like we said, we can get in the Mac Mini, or I have the MacBook Pro. Like the power is nice, but I want the display. We're also expecting them to do the 27-inch display sometime later down in the year, which, I mean, whatever displays in the iMac, I would just assume is going to be the same panel that's in this new, more consumer level display. Mm-hmm. So the question is, do you, jump in with the iMac, or do you wait for what this display is going to be? That's the tough question.
Oh, that's a good question. If you just want the display, like I think, see, we're a little spoiled in our instance here. If you have the MacBook Pro with the config you want, the dream is just having a really great display and just like one cable you can detach and walk away, and then still have the best of both worlds. That makes sense. If you want to be more stationary and you want the benefits of a desktop, then maybe the iMac makes sense, but that's tough. I don't know. I'd say just go with the display, because the display is going to be good. Maybe it's a wider aspect ratio than the iMac, which has been known for sort of being this weirdly sort of boxy design. But it's tough. It's tough too because the iMac Pro seems a lot more concrete than the displays. The displays have been rumored, but who knows when they're going to come.
I mean, yeah, that could be like a 2023 thing. Yeah. Well, let's put it this way. Due to the nature of our job, we will have one in to look at most likely. So that question will be answered very quickly as soon as they are announced. I'm excited for it either way. I'm glad that this is the discussion we're having rather than Apple's not making any of these products.
Oh, yeah.
I'd rather have more options than less options.
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
Latest rumors say that like this is, and we've said this before, like 2022 like seems like this is Apple's year. Like this is, you're talking new products, you're talking all these products are getting major refreshes. What's funny too is it seems like a lot of the products that have always been center stage, like the iPad, this is almost a smaller year for them, where a lot of these products that seem like they've been neglected, Mac Pro, iMac Pro, Mac Mini, they're kind of taking center stage and they're getting a lot of updates, and even iPhone 14 stuff. I mean, there's a lot happening this year. It's a good year to be an Apple fan. Not a good year if you're looking to save money, because there's a lot of cool stuff to buy, but very exciting stuff. Another piece of news, Matt, that has changed since we last spoke has been the drama on the iPhone 14 notch.
This is a lot. This is a saga.
And it's the saga, and the comments I read are very interesting because people are very upset because they think there's no way that Apple's going to remove the notch. I don't know why. Why do you think Apple couldn't do it?
But yeah, I don't know.
So we have the notch since the iPhone 10. Then we got a slightly smaller notch on the iPhone 13, which
20%
do you really
smaller.
Notice it?
Yeah.
I don't even notice the smaller notch.
Well, what's interesting is it's smaller width-wise, but it's actually taller. So, like in some ways, it's actually worse.
I'd have to look at them side by side to notice a difference. I really don't notice it day to day. But what you would notice though is that with next year, the notch is supposed to be removed. So the first theory we heard was that Apple was going to do a hole punch notch on the top middle of the display, similar to other Android manufacturers.
Yep.
And they would sort of have the selfie camera there and then move a lot of the Face ID components under the display. Seemed like a solid plan. Seemed like it makes sense. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then we got new rumors that Apple was going to do a pill-shaped notch. That they weren't going to do a circle, but they were going to do sort of a little bit of a wider pill to accommodate more of the Face ID components. Okay. Yep. Also made sense. The latest rumors now say, because Apple has to be Apple and Apple has to do things their own way, it's going to be a combo notch with a little circular hole punch with the pill. So you almost have this double notch on the front, which it seems like the reason that is because I think there's this rumor, I'm not sure if this was speculation or if this was an actual rumor, that the Face ID components under the display just weren't working as
Yeah, that's
accurately
what I
as
heard
Apple
too.
would have wanted, and there were some issues. So basically, they have to keep the Face ID components, at least some of them, visible to your face on the display, which is why you have those cutouts. So now you have sort of the combo notch, which I guess I want to hear your thoughts. In my opinion, is very brief. Anything's better than the current notch we have right now. Yeah, it'd be nice to have just a little cutout, but I don't know. If you look at the renders, it looks nice. I'm not a huge
Yeah.
fan of it. I don't think it looks that bad.
No, I don't think it looks bad at all. I think I actually kind of like it actually. The way to, if you can't visualize it, the way to explain it is if you turn the phone sideways, it's like a little lowercase I. So there's a little pill kind of thing at the bottom with a circle on top. So that's kind of the way to visualize it. I mean, what's funny about this story is that it was like within hours almost, it felt like it went from we're getting a hole punch with everything else underneath the display to this pill. So it went, from the hole punch, then they said, well, it's going to be this pill shaped with no hole next to it. And then what seemed like a few hours later, they're like, no, there's actually going to be a hole next to it. And then that's what everyone's rolling with. It was just funny how quickly that story evolved and changed. Yeah, I mean, so there's two schools of thought on this. Is one, like, who cares about the notch because you're not doing anything in that space anyway, which I agree, you're not doing anything in that space. Adding this pill plus hole to it is not really solving any of those issues. Like, yes, you have slightly more space on the sides, but you're still not really doing anything in that space because of the pill shaped cutout. So it's not really solving the issue at all. It's just changing the look. On the other hand, it makes sense to transition to this because at some point they're obviously going to want to, try to put everything underneath the display. They're obviously working on that. So this would be a good transition way to do that. That I think is pretty feasible. Like every phone under the sun these days has a hole punch camera on it, so it can't be that hard to do two of those instead of just one. So I think I think it makes sense. It's not. I just don't really care. Like I don't see what the big fuss is. Like I guess the more questionable thing about it for me is like, so is this their final step for the next few years, or are they going to try and get everything under the display for the iPhone 15? Because for the iPhone 12, we had the regular size notch that we had since the iPhone 10. Then we got to the 13, which they made a change, and now they're going to make another change, which they typically don't do year-over-year changes that big. So if I would expect that this eye-shaped cutout would be here for a while.
Yeah, if you believe Ming-Chi Kuo, who has a pretty accurate track record, he says that, and this was a rumor back in, I want to say 2020, he made these predictions, so this isn't all that crazy. I mean, this has been around for a while. 2022 is the year that we get a smaller notch, like significantly smaller. Mm-hmm. Then according to him, 2023 is when the notch goes away, which I agree with you. Apple doesn't typically move that fast, so that would be weird. I would not be at all surprised if that is 2024, 2025. What I do find so interesting is that, okay, if Apple does this change, that makes sense. I've seen so many people think that Apple cannot do this, that Apple's not going to get rid of the notch. You're crazy. That rumor's not true. Why? I don't understand why people think that Apple couldn't do this. You're talking about one of the richest companies in the world, with the smartest minds in the world, with a bunch of money to spend on R&D. They've done an incredible amount of things. Why do you think Apple couldn't remove the notch? I guarantee you there are multiple prototype iPhones in Cupertino that have no notch or a pop-up notch. I'm sure they've got a wide array of different devices, and I don't know why people think this is impossible. So many other companies have done this. I don't know why people think that Apple is that Apple can't do this. I just doesn't make any sense to me.
I think, of course Apple could do it. That's a silly argument to say they can't do it. The question is, will they do it? And, well, I think yes. I think the rumors are pointing to it. So it's not that crazy of a move to do this. But I think maybe there's some confusion on what exactly is going to be happening. I think some people think that because the notch is going away, that Face ID is going away, and that's not going to happen. I can't see Apple ditching Face ID. So if you're in that mindset that notch equals Face ID, so no notch equals no Face ID, then I can see why you would say Apple's not going to do that. I would agree with that, but that's not the rumor here. Face ID is staying. The other thing I've seen people comment, which does make sense, is that this is a very iconic look for the iPhone and it's very recognizable. You see the notch, you know it's an iPhone. And that was one big thing that they had to almost incorporate into the iPhone design when we went to the iPhone 10, because you had the initial home button with the little square in the middle, which then evolved to Touch ID, which was, again, very iconic of the iPhone. It was instantly recognizable. And then when they went to a full screen device, they had to have something so that when you just look at the screen, you know it's an iPhone. The notch is that. That actually, to me, makes more sense of why this is going to be that kind of weird cutout. Because if they just go to the circle, every phone under the sun has a circle. So from the front, at first glance, you wouldn't know exactly what phone it is. This little, pill with the circle, instantly recognizable again as the iPhone. So I think, the people's hesitation that the notch is too iconic is actually a reason why this latest rumor makes more sense instead of it just being a circular cutout.
Completely agree. I think that definitely this sort of works to Apple's advantage because it sort of gives them a unique look for the iPhone. And also, remember that Face ID is unlike other face unlock systems on Android where Face ID is using a dot projector. I think the rumors are going to use some kind of different projector, but they're using a lot more hardware to physically match your face to the saved sort of known face in the secure enclave much more securely than you have with just like a software face unlock on Android. That's why the Face ID trued up system is so important and why Apple will go to great lengths to keep it there because you want the security and sort of the convenience of Face ID. Now, there's also the question of, well, couldn't Apple just remove that altogether, give us a little hole punch, and then just put Touch ID on the iPhone? I guess that could be the case, but I feel like going to Face ID and Touch ID is a discussion that could be had, but removing Face ID and just going back to Touch ID, that seems like a regression that Apple is not going to do ever.
Yeah, I don't think they're getting rid of Face ID, especially as it's getting better and better. So I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah, I don't know. Visually, I'm fine with this change. I think it actually looks kind of cool. It gives you that, more screen real estate. And every time I use a phone with a hole punch camera, that's something I noticed. That's kind of cool to just see like a little dot in the middle of the screen. I actually did just get a Z Fold 3, which has the under display camera. It's a piece of garbage. Well, the camera quality is whatever. That's fine. It's not great, but it's fine. Like considering it's under the display, like that's kind of cool. But you can 100% see that there's a camera underneath this display. You just have these little lines in front of it, and it's actually very distracting to my eye because it looks like you could just notice it. But once you get used to there just being a camera cutout, you get used to it, almost like the notch. You don't see it anymore. But every time you do something on this Z Fold 3 screen, it changes what that dot looks like because it's trying to match it with whatever everything else around it without having the pixel density. So you can actually see it more because every time you refresh the screen to something else, it's a different look up top than it normally is. So if let me put it this way, if what the Z Fold 3 looks like with the camera is what Face ID under the display looks like, then I'm glad they're not doing it because it distracts from the experience.
And I think that's the thing too, is Apple probably could do Face ID under the display,
I bet
but
it
they
works.
don't want to make sacrifices that come with that. Like the Samsung is the classic example that's experimenting with this, but it kind of works good enough, but it's not really ready for prime time. Definitely does not meet Apple's standards. So I think that's why we will continue to have the notch until that system gets worked out and gets better. That's when we'll see sort of Face ID go under the display. Is that in 2023? I don't know, but maybe in the next year, 2, 3, we'll see that change. But I'm excited. There hasn't really been any other news on the iPhone 14 besides like confirmation, like, it looks like 48 megapixel cameras coming. There were some weird rumors that some analyst was like, oh, every iPhone is going to get 120 hertz promotion. Then, oh no, it's just the Pro feature, which I think makes sense. I don't think Apple would give promotion to every iPhone 14 in the lineup. And that's sort of where the rumors have sort of started and ended. Kind of it. That's kind of what we know as of right now.
Yeah, one rumor that maybe you can help clarify is with the camera system. Yeah, we're getting the 48 megapixel. But I've heard go back and forth that we will see a Periscope camera or that's coming next year. Do we have any definitive word on that?
So the Periscope zoom I heard is coming in 2023, like the 10x optical zoom. That's coming later on. But I did hear, I think Everything Apple Pro did a video, and according to him, and I have to look this up even more, Apple is using Periscope technology for the camera. So it's very easy to confuse that for a lot of people, and I did it too. There's Periscope zoom and then Periscope lens technology. So it seems like they are adopting Periscope lens technology to get the lenses flush with the back of the camera or the back of the phone. That's what I heard. So in order to sort of eliminate that bump, that's what they're doing. But the 10x optical zoom that we all want to see, that Periscope zoom tech, that's not coming until 2023, which I guess would make sense since we only really get one big camera upgrade every year or so. So that's how I understand it as of right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, yeah, Periscope, we just associate it with Zoom because that's like what we've always heard of it for. But basically the idea is that instead of having everything stacked on the back of the phone, you can actually flip it on its perpendicular axis, I guess. Like, so instead of going out, it's now flat. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain it, but basically facing sideways instead of facing out. So you have much more room to expand your optics, which typically means you can get better zoom because you have more lenses in there. But I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't just do that for better image quality overall for the main sensor. So that's interesting. That makes a lot of sense. And that's the other thing I was thinking, because the rumor with this new iPhone 14 is that it's going to have flush camera mounts or a camera. What's the word? Well, I'm totally blanking on what's the camera bump, I guess.
Right.
Camera module. There you go. Module is the word I was looking for. But instead of having this huge bump, it would be flush with the phone. But I was looking at this iPhone 13 Pro, and man, that would be a thick phone if they really went all the way with thickness only. So if they're using this Periscope technology to kind of reduce that bump to begin with, that makes a lot of sense.
I wish I was more mechanically inclined and like I understood how this stuff works, because I feel like it's so fascinating. And there's like this whole other world of like Periscope lens technology and like all this more interesting things that I just don't understand that like just goes right over my head. But one day I want to learn more about that, because I feel like there's like a lot of cool stuff that goes into the iPhone that I really don't even understand is really there.
Oh yeah.
Because I always assumed, I'm like, oh, they're just going to make the whole chassis thicker and that's going to accommodate for the flush camera module system, but apparently that's not the case. So
yeah, I mean, that is one way to do it, but yeah, Apple being Apple, they're probably going to complicate it a little bit more. But hopefully, I mean, they also have the 48 megapixel sensor, so adding that on top of this Periscope system, maybe that means we're going to get even better quality than just the sensor upgrade. Like that's kind of the hope, I guess.
I am super excited. Every day I get more excited for the iPhone 14, but we're still a bit of ways away from that announcement. So I think that is about all the sort of late breaking news. There's a lot to cover, and also sad that not a whole lot has happened in 2 weeks. But we were back on track. I'm not having any more babies now, so I'm back in the saddle. I'm ready to go. I'm in dad mode now, and good to continue for the next episode next week. Matt, anything else before we sort of sign off for this episode?
No, glad to have you back. And for everyone listening, we want to remind you of our Apple Circle hotline. That's 949-354-3508. Give that number a call, give us a text, ask us your questions. We will talk about it in the next episode of the podcast. And also be sure to follow us over on YouTube if you're not already, if you're just listening to the audio version. We kind of chunk these episodes out into different clips throughout the week, so you can watch sections instead of having to watch the whole thing if you don't want to. So check that out. The video version is better because you get to look at us. So there you go.
We'll see you all again, same time, same place next week in the next episode of the Apple Circle podcast.